Welcome to the Politics Guys. I'm Michael Baranowski, a political scientist at Northern Kentucky University. My guest today is Saadia Madsbjerg, a managing director at the Rockefeller Foundation. Her work focuses on innovative finance solutions that change the status quo and raise private sector investment capital to further the foundation's goals of building greater resilience and promoting inclusive economies. Ms. Madsbjerg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
You know, while I'm sure that most listeners of the show are familiar with the name Rockefeller, who wouldn't be, I'm guessing that they're probably a little less familiar with the foundation that John D. Rockefeller started way back in 1913. And so I thought before we get into your work specifically, I was hoping you could maybe tell me a little bit about the Rockefeller Foundation in general, sort of what it does, where it does it, and what its goals are, that sort of thing.
Perfect. So John D. Rockefeller, because of his personal beliefs and convictions, had always been committed to charitable giving and to helping those around him who had less. And that was, way, way before the Rockefeller name came to be known for what it is today. Over time, he took those beliefs and convictions and tried to reshape his giving into a more organized and institutional model. And that's essentially what led to the creation of the foundation back in 1913. And with that also very much shaped the field of philanthropy as it exists today. There's some fascinating letters that were written back then and memos. And then if you dig deep into our archives and start reading those, you really get a view of, what the thinking was back then. And what the initial goal and purpose of creating the foundation was. So I won't go too much into detail, but I'd say, one was really creating an institutional model. But the second thing of it was also about making a shift from just giving charity to what was then termed scientific giving, which was about really understanding what the root causes of the challenges that society was facing were, and then apply a much more systematic and a scientific, approach to addressing those root causes. So your question about what we do, where we do it, and what our goals are. So our mission over the last 104 years that we've existed has always remained the same, and that is to promote the well-being of humanity. So that means that over, the 100+ years, we've worked in many different parts of the world. If you look currently, the bulk of our giving and work happens in sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and then in the U.S. So that's the short version of how we got started and where we are today.
Okay, great. I recently actually read a biography of John D. Rockefeller, and so much of it focused on the charitable work, and it's really fascinating stuff. So I would encourage listeners to, if you're interested in that, it's really an amazing story, I think. In the intro, I described your work in sort of a broad way as focusing on innovative finance solutions that change the status quo and raise private sector investment capital to further the goals of building greater resilience and promoting inclusive economies. And obviously, there's a lot to unpack there. And so I'm hoping maybe you could help me do some of that unpacking. Just starting, I guess, right at the beginning, what's meant by innovative finance solutions exactly?
So innovative finance solutions represent a pretty expansive and broad set of financial solutions, of financial mechanisms that create effective and scalable ways of channeling private money from the global financial markets over to social, economic, and environmental programs that, given the focus of the foundation, are to the benefit of poor and vulnerable people. And these financial solutions can take many different shapes and forms across different geographies and sectors. And just to give you a view of what is included in the portfolio, we have solutions like government level insurance against outbreaks and epidemics that are part of it. There are pay-for-performance municipal bonds for the financing of green infrastructure. And then we also have things around social exchange traded funds. So it truly is trying to understand what the possibilities are in the global financial markets and what the mechanisms are, and then trying to bring them over into the development space and say, how do we create the bridge so that it's possible for the private financial markets to come and invest in programs that would really drive impact for poor and vulnerable people and for the environment.
Our first sponsor today is SeatGeek, a great low-cost, super convenient way to buy tickets for live events. With SeatGeek, you can find the best seats at the best prices. It's fully guaranteed, and it only takes a few taps on the app or a few clicks if you access it through their website, SeatGeek.com. I've used SeatGeek both through the app on my phone and at SeatGeek.com, and either way, it's super quick, easy, and informative. I just pulled it up and learned that Bob Seger is not only still alive and kicking, I don't know, he's got to be like 80 or something, but anyway, he's going to be in town pretty soon, and I love Bob Seger. Well, maybe not so much the mid-80s Bob Seger, but the earlier sort of classic stuff. Also, the Brian Setzer Orchestra is coming to Cincinnati. They're this sort of modern swing band, which is something I really enjoy. The point is I wouldn't have known about any of this if it hadn't been for SeatGeek. Plus, with SeatGeek, you get updates on whatever venues, events, and performers you'd like to keep track of. You can even connect with Spotify, your music library, and Facebook to get notifications about artists you listen to or follow. Though if you're not a notification person, you can turn that off too. And when you buy a ticket, they'll even put the day and time of the event on your calendar if you want. Best of all, Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code PoliticsGuy today. That's promo code PoliticsGuy for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. So then this is just very different from sort of, I think, that traditional model that people think of is going to a large corporation or somebody with a lot of money and saying, hey, will you give this money to, promote this project in X community or something like that. This sounds like a very different sort of a model, or really set of models, I guess.
Right, and it is, and the reason we even have to consider such models is that if we look at the scale of money that is needed to deliver on the global development programs that we want to do, and when I say global development programs, I really mean global programs. It's not just a matter of what needs to be done in developing countries. We have a lot of issues on the environmental side, on the social side, on the economic side, in the developed part of the world as well. So if you look at the scale of the problem, and then you look at how much money is available in the philanthropic sector, and even in the public realm, it doesn't even scratch the surface of what's needed. So there is truly, there's still a need for, the kind of more philanthropic or charitable money that comes from big corporates and from philanthropy, but there's desperately also a need to engage the financial markets and create scalable ways whereby they can deploy their money. And just to add a little bit of context or to how big the gap is. Back in 2015, the world came together to agree on the Sustainable Development Goals, and they did provide a very helpful framing, not just in terms of what the global challenges are, where we want to make a step change, but also how much money is needed. And it's estimated that on an annual basis, roughly, we need $5 to $7 trillion a year. And if you look at how much money is available and how much is estimated to be a funding gap, we're talking about $2.5 trillion annually that currently, is not identified in the public budgets or the philanthropic. So in terms of changing the status quo, it is about closing the funding gap and doing so in new and creative ways that taps into the trillions of dollars that are available in global financial markets.
Right. And I guess one of the problems I would imagine or one of the perhaps advantages of working through the private sector is that so many governments, it seems, are sort of going in the opposite direction. If anything, more austerity, cutting spending, and expecting many governments to put more money into this sort of thing oftentimes is not, well, it's not something that's necessarily going to happen, unfortunately.
Correct. That's one of the challenges. And other challenges, a lot of the problems that the world is facing today don't really respect geographic boundaries either. We can think about climate change as an example of that. It doesn't just stop at one boundary or one border and doesn't extend beyond. So there's also a need for more global, more regional solutions. I would say global displacement is another example. And if there are ways of creatively developing programs that address those challenges and at the same time access, money from a central source instead of individual governments, and making sure that it's a priority for them, that really gives you much more flexibility to go and implement the programs as
Right.
well.
So is this along the lines of, I think of a sort of traditional approach to, I guess you could call it charitable giving or philanthropic endeavors, to say, do this because it's the right thing to do and it helps people. And I guess sometimes that certainly can be a powerful thing, but I find that sometimes that's not necessarily enough, and creating incentives to make businesses or make the private sector feel that both it's the right thing to do and it's advantageous in an economic way are also, that can be even a stronger motivation. Is there any of that involved in what you're trying to do?
The economic requirements of the private sector, I think that is more of a guarantee that these solutions would stay in place for longer and deliver impact, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. And I mean, maybe just a slightly different or a nuance to it in terms of, what are the benefits that the development sector, the public sector gets out of working with the private sectors is extremely important as well. I think when you're working with global financial markets, one is you're forced, before you can even engage, you're really forced to take a viewpoint on what the problem is and develop a much better understanding of what your risks are. Look at it again in the context of what I mentioned earlier with natural disasters and climate change. If you want to go, say, engage with the insurance market and develop solutions that can better help you access money post natural disasters, you have to start by saying, I mean, what are my risks and where am I exposed? And then figure out, is there a financial mechanism that can be built where you can go and transfer some of that risk over to the capital market? So I think one is around, it forces the public side to have a better understanding of the risk. The other is also it forces much more accountability and discipline as well. And I think that is extremely valuable in terms of driving towards more impact.
Right. I also part of that, part of the work mentions, or in part of that, the mission statement, I guess you'd call it, it's about changing the status quo. And so obviously the assumption is in many instances, the status quo is not a good thing. And obviously there are various status quos that are bad and so forth. And in the most generic
Right.
sense, you want to take bad situations and make them better. But I'm wondering, are there any sort of common situations you encounter that you focus on altering, perhaps?
So I think that at the highest level, our reference to changing the status quo is more, a reference to closing the funding gap that exists. But in terms of, common things that we come across again and again, and I mean, with this portfolio, we're not focused on a certain geography or a certain sector. We basically say there are places where you can engage with private capital markets and turn them into investable or insurable propositions and make sure that there's more money available, and let's focus on those. A lot of it, I would say, comes down to a better understanding of risks, both from the development side, but also from the private market side. So yes, at the end of it, it is because we want to have, create better social, environmental, and economic programs and really make a difference for the poor and vulnerable people of the world. But a way of getting to that is we need to get more money.
Our second sponsor today is Casper. What are you sleeping on these days? Some sort of sad futon thing, or I don't know, maybe a mattress that's a little saggy, a little droopy, probably past its prime. I get that nobody wants to spend much time thinking about mattresses, and definitely not shopping for mattresses. The whole way the traditional mattress system is set up, it's purposefully confusing, and it's easy to spend way too much time and money, and you end up stuck with something you don't really like. Words like disruptive, I think, are overused, but I'll make an exception here and use it because it's warranted. Casper has disrupted the sleazy mattress system, and in a good way. First off, getting a Casper mattress is incredibly easy. There's no trip to the mattress store and no commission-based marked up prices. It's a simple online experience, and boom, you get an obsessively engineered mattress at a shockingly fair price. I've slept on everything from cots to water beds to fancy overpriced big name innerspring mattresses, and my Casper mattress is unquestionably the best thing I've ever slept on. And one of the things I love about it is it's got a combination of supportive memory foams, and it gives you just the right amount of sink and bounce, and also it's breathable, which means it sleeps cool. And that's really important to me. I mean, my wife says I'm like a human space heater, essentially. Now, you should absolutely take my word about how great a Casper mattress is, but if you're the skeptical type, I get it. I mean, I'm hurt, but I get it. The thing is you don't have to believe me. Casper has over 20,000 reviews with an average of 4.8 stars. Plus, there's free shipping to the US and Canada and a 100-night risk-free deal. If you don't love it, they'll pick it up and refund you everything. Plus, it's designed, developed, and assembled in the USA. And best of all, Politics Guys listeners get $50 toward any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/TPG and using promo code TPG. That's casper.com/TPG, promo code TPG. Terms and conditions apply. Now there are some people who would argue that these sort of endeavors are actually more effective sometimes when they bypass government entirely, and there are a whole set of arguments about government inefficiency and so forth. But I'm wondering, in your experience, do you find that it's better working through governments or in partnership with governments, or perhaps working directly with communities and so forth, or is it just sort of a mix depending on the situation?
So I would say that for the majority of work that we do, there is a representation from the public side, so from the government side, and it could be, at a national level, or it could be at a local level. So the government and the public sector is represented, the private sector is represented, and then we have philanthropy as well, and in certain cases, civil society and NGOs. And just to give you a specific example, we have a project right now that we're funding the Nature Conservancy to do around what's called reef resilience insurance. It is basically understanding that, as climate change progresses, we're exposed to so much more risk from hurricanes, floodings, and, other natural disasters. And there's a massive cost to society, not just economic cost, but also in terms of what it means for people that's associated with it. So we really need to, this goes a little bit back to what do we mean by status quo? It was like that situation is not sustainable. We really need to think differently about what are the solutions that could be put in place to minimize the impact of those natural disasters. And if you think about it, and few people may realize this, but natural infrastructure like mangroves or coral reefs provide a protective barrier for coastal communities. Now, over time, we haven't really done a good job at taking care of that natural infrastructure. So not only do we have more risk of hurricanes and floods and those disasters, but what was a good protection against those perils and disasters, we've also eroded that over time. So the whole question of, okay, we have one problem, we had a good solution in place, but that's being eroded over time. The public sector doesn't have money to go in and rebuild these reefs and maintain them. So what do we do? And, there's an idea that the Nature Conservancy came up with, and they have years and years of science behind what a healthy reef can do, that said, okay, how about if we bring together all of the sectors and the partners that benefit from having a healthy reef in place. And that includes the public sector, so in terms of the municipality and the parks department, because essentially they own that natural infrastructure. It includes the hotel associations and the businesses that are on the coastal front and benefit from having a healthy reef in place. And then in our case, it also includes the Rockefeller Foundation to come in and say, okay, let's convene all of these different voices. Let's put some money in place to say, how can we all come together figure out how we can get insurance to play a role in terms of providing access to money, not just to do the maintenance work, but also to go and do the restoration if that's needed later, and do it through an insurance product. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I do think that you need to have all sectors represented in many of these cases. There are some cases where you may not need to engage with the public, because of the nature of the challenge or the issue. But I would say for the majority, you do.
Yeah. What would you say? I mean, are there any sort of typical challenges that you tend to face in bringing these actors together and doing this sort of work?
So when we look for opportunities, we look for a supportive policy environment. Because if you don't have that in place, if you don't already have, a government or the public authorities that are looking for new solutions, then it gets very hard to go in and try and convince them to change their minds about it. So I think, some places the supportive policy environment exists, and some places it doesn't exist. But that is definitely something that we look for from the beginning. And if it's not in place, it becomes a challenge. The other thing is also we as philanthropy look at our money as being risk capital. So what we do here is, and I didn't get a chance to mention that earlier, the Rockefeller Foundation provides grant funding for the research and development and then testing of some of these mechanisms, which means that we provide the upfront money that can, kind of carry the risk of saying, let's try out a new solution. If it works, that's brilliant. We'll, the public sector and the private sector can then take it to scale. If it doesn't work, then the money that was put up front for testing it and developing it was philanthropic money, and we'll carry that risk. So we do bring that to the table, but you also at the same time have to have parties in the public and private space that see the opportunity and want to invest their time and effort into developing these solutions.
Right. Now, a couple of things that, at least a couple of the goals of the foundation, at least at this point, are building greater resilience and promoting inclusive economies. I was wondering if you could maybe, if I don't know if one of those is perhaps paramount or one you'd like to focus on first, but if you could kind of explain what that means in practice.
So with resilience building, that's an area where the foundation has been focused, a lot, both in terms of for cities, but also at a regional level. And with resilience, what we mean is building the capacity for individuals, for communities, for regions to understand the shocks and stresses that they're exposed to, and whether those are climate-related shocks and stresses or social. So one, to understand what those are, and then to help them build the solutions and institutions that would reduce the impacts of those shocks and stresses and rebound faster. I mean, I gave the example of the reef insurance work that we're doing. Another example that I can give is something called the Forest Resilience Bond that we're currently funding as well. And it's very much focused on the situation that California has been facing for a number of years now, which is they have extreme drought situation on one hand, and then the wildfires on the other hand. And if you look at the challenge for both of them, for us, it's not about going in and saying, let's reverse the effects of climate change. It's saying, if that is happening, what are things you can put in place so that the communities that are exposed to it don't suffer in the same way? And again, without going into too much detail on the financial mechanism, if you look at it for both the drought situation and for the wildfires, there is one thing that can be done that would have an impact on both things. And that is to go in and maintain the health of the forest that exists in California. And maintain the health of the forest is nothing complicated. Again, there's years of science that shows what the impact is. It is to go in and clean up the forest. So remove dead trees, remove shrubs, bring it back to what's considered a healthy state. And if you do that, there are two effects. One is that when a fire starts, it has a natural burn and then it burns out and it doesn't turn into a wildfire. Two is when the snow falls, it actually, instead of getting stopped, it falls all the way through to the floor of the forest and then flows through to the reservoir, so that the quality of the water that you have and the volume of it is much greater than otherwise. So it, that is an example of saying there is a shock and a stress that's related to climate change. We're not trying to reverse climate change in this instance or say let's stop what's happening, but say what are the solutions that can better protect the community and the people that live in that area so that they don't suffer from
Right.
serious impacts.
So in a way, it's sort of a smaller scale, more doable sort of thing, I guess you could say, in a way where you can actually make a discernible impact. That's not to say certainly that we wouldn't like to reverse the larger effects of climate change,
Right.
but given what we have to work with, basically that seems to be perhaps the best use of funds to that. And in a way, it sounds sort of like almost like a preventative think, at least what you were describing with the California the droughts and then fires and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, the whole climate world talks about mitigation and then adaptation. And mitigation is basically saying how do we stop all the practices that's contributing to the rise in temperature. And adaptation side, which is where the resilience part fits in, is more about saying we know some of these terrible things are going to happen, even with all of the efforts that are focused on the mitigation side. But what do we put in place so that the communities still can continue to not be to be able to have access to livelihoods, to be safe, to live healthier lives, and so on.
Right. So focusing on one in no way suggests that the other one isn't at all important. And I would guess with climate change, especially from what we know about the science, a lot of the effects are already sort of baked in, so to speak, meaning that we can't get away from certain changes because of past human activity and so forth. And so we need some sort of a plan to deal with that. And it sounds like that's one of the things that you're trying to promote, basically.
Yes, correct. And then the other goal that you also mentioned that the foundation has had for a number of years now and focused on has been around building inclusive economies. And I won't get too much into details with what we mean by it, because that's almost like a topic of discussion for a separate podcast. But I think, I mean, we look at as an inclusive economy as in we have 5 characteristics that we've kind of put forward. One where there is, equal participation from the people. We talk about equity. It's about growth, stability, and then sustainability as well. And just like with resilience, there is no one program that the foundation can put in place, either from an innovative finance point of view or from the other work that we do, that would, go in and address all of these elements. But we try to say, where is there an opportunity to do something different that would really make a difference? And again, if I were to take an example of something we're doing in the innovative finance space that it goes in and attempts to build a more inclusive economy, I would mention a project that we're doing with a blockchain fintech company called BankU about building economic identity for displaced populations. Which gives them a chance to better get integrated into the new home countries or societies that they end up moving to.
Right. Well, I was thinking you mentioned that example. I think, the idea of inclusive economies and inequality, of course, it's been a huge issue, especially in recent years. And I think sometimes from a U.S. perspective, we have our own notions of what an unequal, non-inclusive economy is. But sometimes, especially if you look at the developing world, the situation is far more non-inclusive than certainly we're used to in the United States. And there's even more, I think, challenges involved in creating inclusive economies, I would imagine.
Yep, correct. And then it's not just about access to economic opportunities. It's about so many other things as well.
Sure. I know we're running a little bit short on time, but there is one final question I would love to ask you. What sort of resources, books, documentaries, online resources, or what have you, would you recommend for listeners who are sort of interested in getting a more in-depth kind of understanding of the issues we've been talking about?
So I'll mention a few different sources, and I think, for the listeners that are interested, once they get to those sources, they can always dig deeper and find more. But there's a fascinating book that Bob Schiller came out with a few years ago that's called Finance and the Good Society. And I remembered reading that a few years ago and was quite inspired by it. And it's not a completely, same reflection of the work that we're doing, but it touches upon all the same elements of how financial markets can be brought to bear in terms of promoting the well-being of society. There is something called the Journal of Sustainable Finance and Investment that is an interesting source as well. More recently, there's a newsletter called the Impact Alpha Brief that was started that covers at a very high level all the stories and the new things that are happening in the innovative finance space that I look at on a daily basis to get a better feel for what's happening outside the sphere of where the foundation is working. And then lastly, I'll mention that we, the Rockefeller Foundation, did a publication with Foreign Affairs last year. It's called The Innovative Finance Revolution. And if anybody is interested in accessing that, you can do that through the Rockefeller Foundation website.
Great. And I will make sure we have links to all of that on the show notes as well for folks who want to check out those resources. All right. Well, on that note, we will wrap up. Saadia Madsbjerg, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. We hope you like what you heard and that you'll check out today's sponsors. SeatGeek. Politics Guys listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code PoliticsGuy. And Casper. Politics Guys listeners get $50 toward any mattress purchase by going to casper.com/TPG and using promo code TPG. Listener support is a huge help to us and we do truly appreciate it. If you're interested in joining our great group of Politics Guys supporters, you can go to politicsguys.com and click on the Patreon link. And if you want to support the show without spending anything, you can share this episode with your friends and followers or pass along our new show posts and tweets on Facebook and Twitter. Leaving reviews and ratings on iTunes also helps. If you've got a question, comment, correction, or just want to get in touch with us for whatever random reason, you can mail us at mail@politicsguys.com. Our Facebook page where you can message us and where we post throughout the week is facebook.com/politicsguys page. We're also on Twitter @politicsguys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Michael Baranowski, Jay Carson, Trey Orndorff, and Bruce Johnson. The show was produced by Michael Baranowski. We'll be back with a new show on Sunday. We hope you'll join us.